The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And each week we delve into stories that piqued our curiosity. So sit back, get comfy, and let's see where our minds wandered this week. But just before that, we need to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get into tonight's episode.
Yes, so if everyone could please take a moment to rate, review, and leave a comment for our podcast on your favorite listening platform, we would really appreciate that.
Yes, we would. It only takes a moment, and it really helps us move up the list so we become more visible and obtain new listeners.
And for those of you who haven't followed us on Facebook yet, we post pictures every Wednesday before our new episode drops. So you can take a look at the places or objects or people that we're going to be talking about.
That's right. So stop by our Facebook page and check it out each week if you're interested. With that said, Beth, where did your mind wander this week?
Well, I'm actually going to talk about someone everyone has probably heard of, but perhaps not everyone knows his connection to the practice of the seance.
Oh, I think I know where we're going with this.
Rosabelle, answer, tell, pray. Answer, look, tell, answer, tell. Arthur Ford may have smiled at the ailing and heavily medicated Bess Houdini as he delivered the strange string of words during his January 8th, 1929 seance in her home. Bess Houdini, widow of the most famous and master of escape Harry Houdini, was convinced, at least at first. Her husband had just contacted her from beyond the grave. That strange string of words was a secret code, one Bess and Harry had devised themselves and used during all of Houdini's shows. And Harry had just spelled out one astonishing word to her from the afterlife: believe. Yes, there was a $10,000 reward for any medium who could successfully contact Harry and convince Bess that it was really him. No, Arthur Ford was not a medium. He was a hoaxer, though. But before he could collect the $10,000, his ruse was revealed. In her semi-lucid state, Bess had shared that secret code with him. Once he'd been found out, Ford didn't pursue the money, and Bess Houdini continued to hold an annual seance in hopes of communicating with her dead husband for another 7 years.
Wow, she truly wanted to make contact with him.
She really did, but Harry Houdini himself was a staunch believer that all mediums were frauds. His feelings were very well documented, including his plea to Congress that all mediums be banned from Washington, D.C. He had devoted years to debunking several well-known mediums, including the incredibly well-known Witch of Lime Street, Mina Marjorie Crandon. Mina Crandon, whose real name was Marjorie, had a huge following, and she performed every parlor trick imaginable. She spewed ectoplasm, she made bells ring out of nowhere, partition walls fell over during her trances. She even had a fake hand that she'd use during her seances so that her own hand would be free to push buttons and levitate tables.
I love those ectoplasm photos. Even though you know they're really fake, they're still pretty cool to look at.
They are really cool. Houdini had signed on to be a member of the Scientific American Committee that was hoping to reward a prize to any self-proclaimed medium that could produce results under specific monitored conditions. His scrutiny of Marjorie Crandon lasted several days, and he was prepared because, as he put it, it takes a flim-flammer to catch a flim-flammer. Before one test, Houdini had tied a silk rubber bandage around the lower part of his leg, so that by the time he met with Marjorie, his leg was incredibly swollen and painful. As they sat next to each other, Marjorie placed her foot behind Houdini's so that their ankles were touching. Because his leg was so swollen and sensitive, he was able to feel her foot move even the tiniest bit. Every so often, Marjorie would remind him to be aware of her foot touching his, but Houdini knew. Her foot had moved each time, so that now it was closer to the apparatus she was going to use to contact the dead. Sure enough, after moving her foot, little by little, she was able to tap the box enough to cause the bell on top of it to ring, precisely when she wanted it to. Marjorie Crandon did not receive the prize.
It's pretty hard to outsmart someone who's a master of magic.
And Houdini's friend, staunch spiritualist Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, was also disappointed. Doyle had been adamant that Marjorie was the real deal. Houdini's and Doyle's friendship might seem like an odd one, but the men bonded over spiritualism, although not exactly in the way you might think. Doyle had lost his son in World War I and was convinced that what he witnessed with his own eyes, both on stage and in seance rooms, was real. If he witnessed it himself, it must be really happening. Houdini, on the other hand, had lost his mother, and although he also desperately wanted to communicate with her, he was too far entrenched in the trickery of theater performances to be taken in by parlor tricks. The two men could debate spiritualism for hours on end, but in the end, it was what drove them apart. But it was Doyle who had worked pretty hard to convince Houdini that speaking with the dead was entirely possible. After Houdini's mother died, Doyle spent quite a bit of time trying to help Houdini contact her. In fact, in 1922, in an Atlantic City hotel room, Sir Arthur and his wife invited Houdini to join a seance. Lady Jean Conan Doyle was a bit of a self-proclaimed medium herself, relying on automatic writing to commune with the dead. During this seance, she went into a sort of trance and wrote word for word what Houdini's mother said to her. According to some sources, the automatic writing she produced filled 5 pages, although other sources say it was as many as 15. Excited with proof that she'd made contact, she gave the pages to Houdini, who immediately denied that it was authentic. First, the message was in perfect English, every word grammatically correct, and his mother had never learned to speak English well enough for it to be from her. If only it had been in Yiddish, then Houdini might have believed it. Second, his mother was the wife of a rabbi. She most certainly would not have drawn a cross at the top of each page, and Jean Conan Doyle had. The thing was, Houdini really did seem to want to believe that communicating with the dead was possible. He was just overcome with the constant tricks and subterfuge he felt so many mediums used. In fact, he referred to these people as leeches and was deeply disgusted by them taking money from grieving people. But then it makes me wonder how he felt about the thousands of people who believed he was performing magic himself every time he performed. And according to some sources, Houdini didn't want to be remembered for his escape tricks at all. He actually wanted to be remembered for putting an end to hucksters taking advantage of the bereaved. He even hired his own team of debunkers, sending them out to attend seances across the country. And they weren't just everyday people. Some, like Rose Mackenberg, were superb private investigators.
I wonder what Houdini would think about the ghost shows on TV now and the devices in which people try to make contact with those who have passed on.
I think he would probably be able to debunk a lot of the stuff, except for EVPs.
Yes, I find EVPs fascinating. And we've had a few of them ourselves. And we've even had one or two while we were recording episodes.
Oh my gosh, that was so freaky that one time.
That it was.
We've never mentioned this before, but we were recording the episode about the Bell Witch. And as we were listening back to it, all of a sudden there was a third voice that didn't belong to either one of us. And we were the only two home. And the creepiest part was that it was in my mic.
That it was. It was very strange. All right, carry on.
So, well, thank you. So Rose Mackenberg was a whiz at disguise. She had several of them, from grieving mother to grieving school teacher to grieving widow. She investigated over 300 cases and accompanied Houdini when he spoke in front of Congress. She shared his sentiment when she said, "I smell a rat before I smell the incense." In 1925, Mackenberg went to a medium as her grieving mother persona and told the medium, Charles Gonzalez, that her child had died just a few months earlier. Gonzalez told her that for just $25, he'd contact his 800-year-old Hindu spirit guide and teach her to do the same by simply gazing into a bowl of water. It would work better, of course, if she did it while naked.
Wow. Well, I guess whatever works.
Houdini was so incensed that while giving a performance in Indianapolis several weeks later, he confronted Gonzalez in the audience from the stage, telling everyone in the audience what $25 could get them.
That's awesome.
Just an aside, though, Rose Mackenberg always used an assumed name when she attended seances, and one of my favorites was Francis Roud, or F. Roud.
Oh, get it? Fraud.
Yeah. Houdini did his own public debunking, of course, showing spectators just exactly how certain tricks were done, including spirit photography. There's one photo of him sitting next to the ghost of Abraham Lincoln that's quite compelling, especially since he was very clear about how he did it. Making use of an article he'd read by Harry Price, a member of the Society for Cyclical Research, about how photographers simply use double exposure, Houdini had a photograph made of himself sitting next to his boyhood hero. He even sent it to members of Lincoln's family, including Robert Todd Lincoln, clearly stating that the enclosed photo was a fake.
Wow, I wonder what she thought about that.
Well, I think he was trying to make a very, very good point. I mean, people were selling these photos all over the place, and they were everywhere, and he just wanted the family to know, this is how it's done. So why did Bess Houdini, Harry's longtime love, wife, theater partner, and grieving widow, hold yearly seances every Halloween for an entire decade? Because her husband promised her that if contact from the afterlife was possible, he'd do it. As most people probably know, Houdini died unexpectedly at age 52 on October 31st, 1926, from a ruptured appendix. It didn't help that he'd been punched in the gut multiple times by a college student. As bizarre as that sounds, it's true. Houdini had given a lecture at McGill University and invited a few students to visit him in his dressing room on October 22nd. One of the students asked him if it was true that he could resist hard punches, which was a claim Houdini had made. But before Houdini could prepare, the student punched him multiple times. Despite severe pain, Houdini gave several more performances in the ensuing days until his final show in Detroit. His appendix had indeed ruptured several days prior, and despite surgery, Houdini passed away. Now, there is some controversy as to whether the punches are what truly killed him, but regardless, he had been in some medical distress for some time.
It's so tragic. The world lost a truly gifted man.
Yeah. I can't imagine being that poor kid who thought that he was the one that had killed Houdini. Like just that, having that, I don't know what the word is, darkness over you or weight on you.
Right. Well, hopefully he got some therapy. Well, I mean, it's hard to get, through on your own.
Right.
I mean, you possibly killed Houdini.
Before his death, Houdini and Bess agreed that if he were to communicate, it would be through the code the two had used for their entire careers. It's not clear as to whether or not Bess knew what Houdini would spell out, but it doesn't seem so, as she claimed after Arthur Ford gave her that infamous line of Rosabelle, answer, tell, pray, answer, look, tell, answer, tell, that her late husband spelling out believe was a total surprise. But prior to that night on January 8th, 1929, and after that night for a total of 10 years, Bess held a seance every single year on Halloween, offering $10,000 to anyone who could speak to her with Houdini's words. Her last seance was held in 1936, exactly 10 years after his death, on the rooftop of the Knickerbocker Hotel in Los Angeles. She and a group of friends gathered in a circle around a candle she had kept burning next to his picture. No message came through. Disheartened, Bess said, quote, "Houdini did not come through. My last hope is gone. I do not believe that Houdini can come back to me or to anyone. It is now my personal and positive belief that spirit communication in any form is impossible."
Poor Bess.
I know.
She must have been crushed.
I know. That anticipation and, yeah.
That's sad.
Later in 1943, when she was asked why she had stopped trying, Bess famously said, 10 years is long enough to wait for any man.
Wow. Well, she has a point. And she did try for quite a long time.
And I think you have to have a cutoff. I mean, if you don't, it would probably drive you insane.
There's no closure. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's not that she didn't try.
Right. But the tradition didn't end just because Bess had put it to rest herself. Every year, groups of magicians hold their own seances, some with reporters in attendance, others more private. But to be fair, to this day, Houdini has not said a word.
Oh, Houdini was such a fascinating, talented gentleman. But perhaps not everyone can communicate with us from the other side.
You've got a good point. Hey, did you know? During the horse racing ban of 1945, 6,000 spectators came to the Kentucky Derby to watch a unique sort of race. Spanning just 20 feet, the racetrack boasted racers with names like Broken Spring, Nutty Brittle, and Fine Liqueurs. The spectators bet a total of nearly $200,000 in today's money, despite bets being capped at 50 cents each. Most of the racers, having never raced before, stopped midway and turned around, heading back to the starting line. But Broken Spring won, completing the 20-foot track in an impressive 1 minute and 20.3 seconds. Oh, did I forget to mention? The racers were turtles. Who'da thunk it? So where are we wandering with you tonight?
Well, have you ever seen a taxidermy rabbit head with antlers hanging on someone's wall and thought to yourself, what in the bloody hell is that? I know I have. The Wolpertinger is a shy animal.
Oh, that's not what I thought it would be called.
Well, all will reveal itself in time.
I imagine it will. Carry on.
The Wolpertinger is a shy animal, making its home in the forest of Germany. It minds its own business, eating herbs and roots. But if you startle one or threaten one, watch out. It will spray you with such a foul stink that no soap or deodorant or perfume can erase it for 7 years.
Wow.
And if you dare get close enough so that a Wolpertinger's saliva touches your skin, tufts of coarse fur will begin to grow wherever the saliva touches you.
Wow. Who knew?
So why then would you want to get close to a Wolpertinger? Because they are unlike any woodland creature you have ever seen. Part mammal and part bird, Wolpertingers come in all shapes and sizes. Some have the body of a fox and the head of a duck, but the most common, terrifying description is of ones that have the body of a squirrel, the head of a rabbit, the wings of a duck, and the antlers of a deer.
That is a lot going on.
They sound like some horrible genetic experiment gone wrong, and they could be, except Wolpertingers have been known to live in the Bavarian forests for almost 200 years. So how did they come to exist? The legend says that the original Wolpertinger came about out of love, a love between a deer and a rabbit.
A forbidden love?
Well, you could say that, yes. So imagine, if you will, that Bambi and Thumper were out enjoying a beautiful spring day and happened to cross paths. They gaze into each other's eyes, and romance fills the air. And as a result of their short, steamy interlude, some very interesting offspring are born.
No one will ever watch that movie the same way again.
Well, that's how I think it happened. All of the other woodland creatures were now intrigued, and suddenly love between the species was possible, and an entire collection of hybrid creatures arose. Naturally, humans caught sight of at least one of them, and eager to hunt them, they quickly realized that the best way to do it is to have a single man find the most attractive woman they could and bring her out to the forest during a full moon.
Yeah, right. Sure, that'll work.
The beautiful woman must be single, and if the Wolpertinger feels that the love between the man and the woman is genuine, it will reveal itself. Something's going to be revealed. And I imagine a lot of hunters use that line.
Come on, honey, let's go find the Wolpertinger.
Or if you're not in the mood for a romantic thing out in the woods, you could always snare one with a stick and a lit candle. Wolpertingers, which really do seem to be romantic creatures, are attracted to the candlelight and will enter a snare trap just to be close to the glowing light.
Aw.
This snare tactic, or the other two people in the moonlight version, must really work because pubs and hotels and restaurants all over Bavaria are filled with stuff and mounted examples. Okay, now with all that said, here's the real scoop.
So you're telling me you were just pulling our leg, in case we hadn't guessed. Go ahead.
In the 1800s, a group of taxidermists in East Germany began joining the bodies of different taxidermied animals together. Why, you ask? Who really knows? Maybe it started out as a joke or a bet. Who could make the most outrageous creature seem the most real? For whatever reason, that's exactly what they did, and they discovered very quickly that gullible tourists would buy them, especially if they played up with the alleged local legends. Soon, tourists were on the hunt to buy the very best Wolpertinger they could get their hands on, and the strange animals were on walls and tables of wealthy homes, taverns, and hotels everywhere. But then, across the great blue ocean, a man named John Coulter ran across an honest-to-God for real Wolpertinger in an unlikely place in Wyoming. Since he was one of the first white settlers in what was to become Wyoming, his tale is curious. In 1829, a trapper named Roy Ball supposedly caught one in one of his traps. Coulter's and Ball's stories stuck around right through the Wild West, with cowboys telling tales of a strange hybrid animal. Part killer rabbit, part pygmy deer that could run as fast as 90 miles an hour and liked to mimic their voices when they sat around the campfires at night. When spotted, this jackalope...
Ah, see? That's what I thought they were called.
Well, I told you it would reveal itself.
You did.
When spotted, this jackalope, named for its incredible speed and mostly jackrabbit body, was a brownish color and weighed about 3 to 5 pounds. It was nearly impossible to catch, of course, but there were stories that when it felt threatened, watch out. It was known to charge antlers first into battle.
I just had visions of this little tiny rabbit with antlers just, running full speed with its little...
Gouging out your ankles?
Yes.
Okay, now back to where we were.
Sorry.
It was known to charge antlers first into battle, attempting to gouge its attackers with its nasty horns. The jackalope was not something worth messing with. The jackalope tales were most commonly retold throughout Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, and New Mexico, right up until 1934, when Douglas and Ralph Herrick had an aha moment. According to Douglas, he and his brother came home from a day of hunting, and he had thrown one of the rabbits they shot onto the floor. For some reason, the rabbit carcass slid, not stopping until it came to rest beside a pair of antlers. Douglas looked at it and thought, that looks like a rabbit with horns. He just so happened to be a taxidermist, so he got to work mounting the antlered rabbit onto a board, and of course, he sold it for $10 to a hotel owner named Roy Ball.
Wait, didn't you say the trapper who supposedly caught one was named Roy Ball?
Yes, in 1829.
Wait, what?
There's some speculation that the enterprising hotel owner and the Herrick boys knew how to spin a really good yarn.
Oh, so they may have made up the entire trapping story as part of the legend.
Or somebody else along the way embellished the story and switched some names around. Yes.
Interesting and very clever.
By Douglas Herrick's own account in newspapers, he was only about 10 years old in 1934. So this first sale must have seemed like a real financial boon, since in today's money, it would be the equivalent of about $180.
Wow. And he made the first one when he was only 10.
Apparently, yes. The Herrick boys sold another and another and another, most likely thanks to Roy Ball's pride in his purchased jackalope. He told everyone and anyone who came into his hotel the myth of the jackalope, creating not just a new wave of believers, but ones with money who wanted to bring their own jackalopes home with them. Just an aside, according to the New York Times newspaper article I read from 1977, where Douglas Herrick was interviewed about the whole thing, the original jackalope from Ball's Labonte Hotel had been stolen and never returned.
Oh, no.
Anyways, this new wave of jackalope lovers back in 1934 was just as widespread as the original Wolpertinger craze in East Germany, and the people of Douglas, Wyoming, where Douglas and Ralph Herrick lived, embraced this new trend, even offering jackalope hunting permits to gullible tourists. Imagine paying for a permit and then reading the small print, only valid on the 31st day of June, between the hours of 12 midnight and 2 a.m. And that's what you get for not reading the fine print.
They were very, very clever.
Douglas Herrick didn't just stick with jackalopes. He also mounted the tail of a fish to the body of a cat, calling it a Wyoming catfish. And he patiently listened as a tourist from California who was wearing a Hell's Angels vest asked him where to find some live jackalopes so he could start his own breeding farm.
I don't think you want to tell someone in a Hell's Angels vest back then that perhaps they'd have trouble finding them.
Yeah, I think I'd advise against that. Douglas, Wyoming embraced the myth so wholeheartedly that they commissioned a large 8-foot statue of a jackalope in the center of town and proudly boast the title of Jackalope Capital of the World. But what about all those people, and there still might be some out there, even after hearing my story, that insist quite vehemently that the jackalope is real? Well, ironically enough, they may have some science behind them. According to a Smithsonian Magazine article I found, one of the museum's collections managers came across something in their collection that threw them for a loop: an eastern cottontail rabbit with antlers protruding from its head. But this was no taxidermied specimen. It was a real animal.
Huh.
Turns out there is a disease, the Shope papillomavirus, that causes keratin deposits to grow outside rabbits' and hares' bodies, resulting in what can only be described as horns. Some grow outside the mouth, but in this case, the horns on this poor little cottontail were on its head, creating a jackalope.
Really?
Dr. Shopes discovered the virus back in the 1930s. Coincidentally, at the same time, the Herrick brothers were making their taxidermied versions, but descriptions of horned rabbits go as far back as the medieval times when we look at the Bavarian folklore. In fact, horned rabbits were still featured as real creatures in the scientific texts well into the late 1700s.
Wow.
So maybe that original sighting way back before Wyoming wasn't even a state yet was real. It wouldn't be all that far-fetched to say maybe some of the early Wild West cowboys caught sight of one.
Maybe.
But while you're out and about, if you catch sight of one, be careful. You don't want to make a jackalope mad.
That's a cool story, honey. Thank you for that one.
Well, I can remember being little and seeing them in friends' homes and some rustic restaurants that we went to and wondering if they were real, since I'd never seen one for myself.
I know, and I hate to admit this, but I think I kind of questioned if they could be real when I saw one hanging on a wall once too, and I wasn't all that little. But a lot of them are really well done.
Even when you get close up to them, it's hard to tell.
And it makes you wonder.
That it does. Well, Beth, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode.
I suppose so. And as always, you can check out our show notes for our sources if you would like to delve deeper into tonight's stories.
That's right. They're always there right in our show notes, just in case you'd like to do some further research for yourself.
Also, like I said at the top of the episode, we always post pics on our Facebook page. So if you don't feel like Googling stuff and you're curious to see pictures of what we're talking about and you just want to take a quick look, check out our Facebook page because there's always pictures there.
That's right. There always is. You post them every week.
I do.
So we'll see all you wanderers again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment. It really helps us move up the list so people can find us.
See you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.